Right after I was born, the housekeeper switched me out. She shoved me into the servants' quarters, claiming I was the illegitimate daughter of a servant. Meanwhile, she placed her own daughter in a gold-trimmed cradle, turning her into the envy of everyone as the real little princess. For 3 years, I watched her wear princess dresses, drink imported milk powder, and be cherished and doted on by her parents. As for me, I slept on a floor mat, ate leftover food, and even my name was just randomly assigned. That night, the housekeeper got drunk and let something slip. I heard every word clearly. That very night, while everyone else was fast asleep, I slipped into the master bedroom. On the baby's cradle, the fake little princess was sound asleep. I climbed up, aimed at her, and raised my foot. Then came a loud thud, the dull thump of flesh hitting the carpet. Immediately afterward, Suinin's heart-wrenching sobs erupted. All the lights in the entire villa flicked on in an instant. I heard hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. My dad, Jiang Xinghua, my mom, Song Yalan, and the housekeeper, Su Fang. All of them were there. They burst in together. The sight before them left them all speechless. There I was, Jiang Yu, the illegitimate daughter, the servant girl in their eyes, lying peacefully in the baby crib that had once belonged to the Jiang family's beloved only daughter. Meanwhile, their cherished daughter, Suinin, lay on the cold carpet, crying so hard she was nearly breathless. And then, Mom Song Yalan was the first to snap out of her shock, letting out a scream as she rushed over to pick up Suinin. Dad Jiang Xinggua's face turned deathly pale, his gaze piercing me like a blade. But housekeeper Su Fang's face instantly drained of color. She knew better than anyone what this meant. Anan, my precious baby, where did you fall? Let Mom take a look right away. Song Yalan held Suinin close, tears streaming down her face with heart-wrenching sorrow. Suinin's little face was streaked with tears, and she reached out with her tiny finger, pointing straight at me. It was her. It was her who pushed me. She spoke with slurred words, yet her meaning was crystal clear. All eyes once again turned toward me. Jiang Xinggua's gaze grew even colder. What's going on? His voice was laced with barely contained fury. Su Fang's body trembled like a leaf in the wind. She stepped forward quickly and yanked me out of the soft baby bed in one swift motion. Her strength was astonishing. Her grip hurt so badly it felt as if my bones were being crushed. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It's my fault. I didn't keep a close enough eye on this damn girl. She must have been sleepwalking. She must have wandered up here on her own. As she spoke, she squeezed my arm hard, her eyes flashing with a stern warning. I bit back the pain. I didn't say a word, just kept my dark, wide-open eyes fixed on these two so-called parents before me. My gaze was filled with cowardice and fear, like that of a frightened little animal. And all of this was an act. Over the past 3 years, I've long since learned how to disguise myself just to stay alive. Song Yalan's entire attention was fixed on Suinin. She wasn't giving me so much as a glance. But Jiang Xinghua was scrutinizing me closely. His brow was tightly furrowed. Perhaps he was wondering, how could a 3-year-old child possibly run from the maid's room all the way to the master bedroom, and even climb up into such a high crib? Sleepwalking? He repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. A cold sweat instantly broke out on Su Fang's forehead. Why, yes, sir. This child has had this habit ever since she was little. I'll take her away right now and lock her up, never letting her disturb the young lady again, she said, already reaching out to drag me away. Inside, I let out a bitter laugh. Lock her up? As if my goal tonight wasn't just to kick Suinin a little bit. No, I intended to stay right here, right by their side. Then I started trembling. My petite body shook violently, and my teeth chattered uncontrollably. I looked at Jiang Xinghua with eyes filled with utter terror, as if I'd just seen something horrifying. Then, I burst into tears, wailing so miserably that even Suinin lying on the ground seemed to pale in comparison. My sobs were frantic and terrified, mixed with an indescribable sense of grievance. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I cried, speaking in disjointed fragments. There was a bad guy. A bad guy in black. He picked me up. He tried to grab my little sister too, and I got scared, so I pushed him away. My words were jumbled and incoherent, but the core message was crystal clear. Someone from outside had broken in. Jiang Jinggua's expression changed in an instant. He wasn't concerned about me. Instead, he was worried about the security of the Jiang family. What did you say? The man in black? He snapped sharply. I jumped at the sound of his voice and burst into even louder tears. Su Fang was stunned. She hadn't expected me to come up with such a blatant lie. She wanted to argue back, but she didn't dare. After all, if she claimed there were no bad guys around, how could she explain my presence here? Was she really going to admit that she'd been drunk and let something slip? Something I'd overheard? She just couldn't take that risk. Sir, this girl is talking nonsense. All she could do was stiffly deny it. How could an outsider possibly have gotten into the house? Jiang Jinghua ignored her. His sharp gaze swept across the bedroom. The windows were tightly shut, and the door was locked. Indeed, it didn't look as though anyone from outside had entered. His eyes fell on me once more, filled with scrutiny and impatience. Enough already. Stop crying. Song Yalan finally managed to calm down Su Wenin. She held her daughter close and gave me a disgusted look. A servant's child. What else could you expect? She's just like her mother, always telling lies. Su Fang. Take her away already. Just looking at her makes me feel sick. Su Fang seemed to be relieved beyond measure. She immediately grabbed my arm, trying to drag me out of this place full of trouble. I knew this was my last chance. Once she took me back to the servants' quarters, even more brutal torment awaited me. I couldn't leave. Just as Su Fang began to pull me along, I used all my strength to break free from her grip. With a thud, I dropped to my knees on the ground, not kneeling before Su Fang, nor before Song Yalan. No, I knelt before Jiang Jinghua, the absolute authority in this household. I tilted my head back, tears streaming down my face as I looked up at him. In my eyes, there was no longer just fear. There was also a hint of reverence and dependence. Dad, you scared? I called out timidly. That single word, Dad, immediately plunged the entire room into eerie silence. Everyone froze, including myself. No, wait. I hadn't meant to call him Dad. I'd intended to say Sir. But this 3-year-old body seemed to have a mind of its own. Overwhelmed by sheer fear and an intense desire to be protected, it blurted out the most heartfelt, deepest-sounding name from the depths of my heart. Jiang Jinggua's body went rigid. He lowered his head and looked at me, into my thin, almost skeletal face, into those dark eyes that gleamed like grapes. In his cold gaze, I caught a fleeting glimpse of an emotion so complex it was almost impossible to decipher. Shock, confusion, and something else, a hint of tenderness that even he himself hadn't noticed. Su Fang's face had turned as pale as paper. Silence hung in the air, as if time itself had come to a standstill. Song Yalan held Su Wenin in her arms, her brow furrowed even tighter. What did she call you? She asked Jiang Jinghua, her voice laced with disbelief and revulsion. A bastard born of a maid. How dare she call you Dad? Su Fang was so terrified that she collapsed onto her knees with a thud. Sir, madam, I'm so sorry. This child has some kind of mental issue. She's always talking nonsense. I'll give her a proper beating when I get home. As she bowed repeatedly, she reached out toward me, trying to cover my mouth. I jerked back, dodging her hand. Still kneeling on the ground, I looked up at Jiang Jinghua. I didn't say a word. Instead, I fixed him with those eyes that were strikingly similar to Song Yalan's, and stared at him stubbornly. My gaze seemed to say, I didn't call you wrong. Jiang Jinggua's Adam's apple bobbed once. He didn't erupt into anger right away, nor did he order Su Fang to take me away. He just stared at my face for a long, long time. So long that Song Yalan began to feel slightly impatient. Jinghua, what are you still standing there for? Get Su Fang to take her away already. Anen's even scared. Su Wenin, cradled in her arms, promptly started sobbing again, as if perfectly in sync with the situation. Daddy, I'm scared. She's so dirty. Su Wenin's voice pulled Jiang Xinghua out of his deep contemplation. The trace of emotion that had briefly flickered in his eyes vanished in an instant, replaced once more by his usual coldness. Su Fang, take her downstairs, he said softly. Yes, sir, Su Fang replied, visibly relieved. She quickly scrambled to her feet and grabbed me as though I were a little chick. This time I didn't resist, because I knew the goal was already half achieved. The seed of doubt had already been planted in his heart, and I'd caught it during that brief moment of eye contact just now. A man who rules the business world wouldn't let emotions sway him easily, but he absolutely trusts his own eyes and judgment. My face is the greatest proof of that. Su Fang dragged me by the arm, hurrying out of the master bedroom. Behind us, we heard Song Yalan comforting Su Wenin. Anan, don't be afraid. Mom will make her leave our house tomorrow. Okay? Okay. Su Wenin immediately stopped crying. Su Fang's steps faltered for a moment. My heart sank too. Leave this house? That's simply out of the question. On the way back to the servants' quarters, the long corridor was eerily silent. Su Fang didn't say a word, but the grip on my arm grew tighter and tighter. I knew a brutal beating was waiting for me. Sure enough, as soon as we stepped into that small, dark, and damp room, she bolted the door from the inside. Then, she turned around, and the fear that had been etched on her face moments earlier was gone, replaced instead by a grimace of ferocity and venom. You little bitch! She slapped me hard across the face. The pain was searing and stinging. I stumbled backward and fell to the ground. Who told you to run out there? Who told you to talk back? Still not satisfied, she raised her foot and kicked me hard. I curled up into a ball, using my arms to protect my head. My most effective self-defense technique, one I'd learned over the past 3 years. I'd long since grown accustomed to this kind of pain. Compared to the hunger and endless cold, physical pain was actually the easiest to endure. Did you hear something? After kicking me several times, she seemed to grow tired and stopped, panting as she asked me. I lay on the ground, saying nothing. I'm asking you a question. She grabbed my hair roughly and yanked me off the ground. My scalp felt like it was being torn apart. Forced to lift my head, I looked up at her contorted face. I'm warning you, Jiang Yu. Starting today, if you dare to run around or talk nonsense again, I'll break your legs and rip out your tongue. Remember this well. I'm your mother. That Jiang Enan. That's the real young lady of the Jiang family. You're nothing but a stray bastard nobody wants. All your life, you'll only ever be good enough to serve my daughter like a slave, she said viciously. I looked at her, my gaze calm. I didn't cry, nor did I beg for mercy. My composure seemed to infuriate her even more. You still dare to glare at me? She raised her hand, ready to strike me once again. Just then, there was a sudden knock at the door. Mr. Su, are you in there? It was the voice of a young maid. Su Fang's movements froze mid-motion. Her expression shifted slightly. What is it? She snapped impatiently. The master wants you to come over right away, the maid said from outside the door. Su Fang's pupils suddenly contracted. Sir? It's so late. What does he want with me at this hour? A foreboding sense of dread began to weigh heavily on her. She let go of my hair and slammed me hard onto the floor. You'd better stay put and not go anywhere, she warned me in a low voice, then walked over and opened the door. The maid standing outside froze for a moment when she saw her. Ms. Su, the state of your face? It's nothing, Su Fang replied vaguely, adjusting her clothes and hair. Where's the gentleman? He's in the study. All right, I'll be right there. Su Fang closed the door and locked it from the outside. I heard her footsteps hurrying away into the distance. In the room, darkness and silence once again descended. I pulled myself up from the cold floorboards and made my way toward the door. I pressed my ear against the door, but I couldn't hear a thing. Yet I knew for sure. Jiang Xinghua must have become suspicious because of that one little dad. I just said. He was going to put it to the test, and Su Fong was his very first step in that verification process. A cold smirk curled at the corner of my lips. Did Su Fong really think locking me up would solve everything? How naive she was. This tiny maid's room could never possibly hold me captive. I walked over to the window and expertly dragged over a small stool. The window wasn't locked. It had only a simple latch. I stood on tiptoe and with some effort managed to slide the latch open. Then, I pushed the window open wide and took a deep breath of the cool night air. Jumping from here would hurt a bit. But that didn't matter. I knew this evening's real show was just about to begin. I had to see it with my own eyes. The lamp in the study was on. Jiang Xinghua sat behind a massive rosewood desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. Before him lay a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, yet he hadn't touched it. His mind was in utter chaos. In his head, the scene kept replaying again and again. The child crying out to him, calling him Dad. And then there were those eyes that were almost identical to Song Yalin's. 3 years ago, on the day the child was born, he'd been overseas negotiating an important contract. By the time he returned, the baby had already been born for several days. Song Yalin had been somewhat weak after giving birth, so he hadn't given it much thought. As always, it was Su Fong who handled matters at home. Su Fong was a distant relative of Song Yalin and had been with them ever since Song Yalin married into the Jiang family. They placed absolute trust in her. That's why he'd never once doubted his own daughter. But tonight, that child named Jiang Yu was like a tiny pebble dropped into the calm surface of his heart, sending ripples spreading outward, one after another. Could a 3-year-old really have such a look in her eyes? It wasn't just fear. It was also a calmness and stubbornness beyond her years. It was utterly strange. Knock, knock. The sound of a gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Su Fong pushed open the door and stepped inside, head lowered, her expression both respectful and tinged with a hint of unease. Sir, you wanted to see me? Have a seat. Jiang Zhanghua gestured toward the chair opposite him. Su Fong felt slightly overwhelmed and sat down carefully, as if walking on eggshells. That child, her name is Jiang Yu, isn't it? Jiang Zhanghua got straight to the point. Yes, sir, Su Fong replied, her heart leaping into her throat. Who's her father? Jiang Zhanghua fixed his gaze directly on her eyes. For a moment, Su Fong's eyes flickered ever so slightly. I don't know either. She's an abandoned baby I found at the entrance to my hometown. Seeing how pitiful she was, I just kept her by my side. She'd already prepared this lie, perfectly seamless. Jiang Zhanghua didn't say a word. He just stared at her. His gaze seemed to penetrate right through her soul. Su Fong felt goosebumps rising on her scalp and broke into a cold sweat. How long have you been following Yalin? Jiang Zhanghua suddenly changed the subject. Almost 10 years, sir. 10 years. Jiang Zhanghua nodded. Yalin really trusts you. The mistress has shown me such immense kindness. It's beyond measure. Su Fong quickly declared, eager to prove her loyalty. So, when Yalin gave birth 3 years ago, it was you who handled everything inside and out at the hospital, Jiang Zhanghua said casually. Su Fong's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? Is he suspecting something? Well, that's just my job. Her voice sounded slightly dry. I remember you said back then that the baby was born with a red birthmark on her ankle. Jiang Zhanghua went on. Su Fong's face turned pale in an instant. A birthmark. How could she have forgotten about that? Back then, to convince the Jiang couple that Su Anin was indeed their daughter, she deliberately fabricated the story about the birthmark. After all, Su Anin really did have a red birthmark on her ankle. Yet the real Jiang family's beloved daughter had none at all. Why yes, sir, she stammered, forcing herself to admit it. Jiang Zhanghua replied briefly, then dropped the subject. He picked up his cold coffee and took a sip. All right, you may leave now. Remember, keep a close eye on your daughter and don't let her run around haphazardly again, scaring Anin. His tone was utterly calm, devoid of any hint of emotion. Yet Su Fong felt as if she'd just walked through the gates of hell. Yes, sir. I've got it memorized, she said quickly, rising to her feet and bowing deeply before retreating from the room. It wasn't until she stepped out of the study and closed the door behind her that she realized her back was soaked with cold sweat. That had been way too close. Thankfully, the master hadn't pressed further. She let out a long sigh of relief and hurried toward the servants' quarters. She had to go back and give that damn Jiang Yu a proper talking to. It was all that little bitch's fault. In the study, Jiang Zhenghua set down his coffee cup. He pulled open a drawer and took out a photograph from inside. It was a picture of Song Yalin's baby girl, taken on her first full moon. The infant in the photo was chubby and rosy-cheeked, with big, dark, and sparkling eyes. He looked almost exactly like that kid named Jiang Yu from tonight. Then he remembered something else. The Song Yalin family had a very peculiar genetic trait, a severe allergy to mangoes. Yet his own daughter, Jiang Enin, absolutely loved eating mangoes. At first, he just assumed it was because kids weren't like their mothers. But now, thinking back, the whole thing seemed eerily suspicious. A bold thought, a thought so absurd even he found it hard to believe, began to take shape in his mind. Could it be? He picked up the phone on the table and dialed a number. Hello, Lao Li, it's me. I need you to do me a favor. Early tomorrow morning, send your most trustworthy person over to my house. Get 2 samples, do a paternity test. 1 sample is for Enin and the other? He paused, and suddenly the image of that thin yet stubborn little face popped into his mind. She's Su Feng's daughter, Jiang Yu. Remember, this matter must remain absolutely confidential. After hanging up the phone, Jiang Zhenghua leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He hoped he'd simply been overthinking things. Meanwhile, outside the window, atop a towering tree, I was hiding behind the dense foliage, taking in every detail of the study. Though I couldn't make out what they were saying, I did catch Jiang Zhenggua's expression, the look of deep contemplation when he pulled out the photograph. And even more vividly, I saw the serious, resolute expression on his face as he made that final phone call. I knew then my plan had worked. He'd been shaken. All I needed to do now was add just one more spark, to let this flickering flame of doubt burn itself into an all-consuming wildfire. Silently, I slid down from the tree like a nimble cat. I didn't head back to the servants' quarters. Su Feng was surely furious right now. Going back there would be like walking straight into a trap that I'm going somewhere else. A place where I can stoke the fire even higher. Mom, Song Yalin's room. Song Yalin wasn't asleep yet. She sat in front of the dressing table, gently stroking Su Enin's hair. Su Enin had been frightened earlier today and insisted on sleeping with her. At this moment, the little girl had already fallen fast asleep, her tiny face still bearing a hint of unease. Song Yalin sighed. Once again, she found herself thinking about what had happened tonight. The child named Jiang Yu, that dirty little face, and that timid little voice calling out, Dad! To be honest, from the very first glance at that child, she'd felt something strange deep inside. It wasn't entirely disgust. There was also a vague, indescribable sense of closeness, especially when the child had knelt on the floor, looking up at her with eyes so strikingly similar to her own. Her heart had actually felt a sharp pang. How could it be? She must be going crazy. After all, that kid was just the child of a servant. A rough, ill-mannered brat who'd even learned to lie. Song Yalin shook her head, trying to shake off these absurd thoughts. Just then, she heard a faint, muffled sob, a sound that seemed to come from the balcony. She froze for a moment. Who could it be out there at this late hour? She got up quietly and tiptoed over to the floor-to-ceiling window, gently pulling back a corner of the curtain. Under the moonlight, a tiny, frail figure was curled up in the corner of the balcony. It was Jiang Yu. She was hugging her knees, her head buried in her arms, her small shoulders trembling ever so slightly. She was crying so heartbreakingly, so helplessly, yet daring not to make too much noise. It was as if she were afraid of disturbing others, or perhaps afraid of being discovered in her vulnerability. A sharp pang struck Song Yalin's heart, leaving her feeling deeply pained. She didn't know what had come over her. Just this afternoon, she'd hated this child so much. But now, seeing her crying alone in the cold night breeze, she suddenly felt a pang of compassion. As if possessed by some unseen force, she found herself opening the balcony door. "It's so late. What are you doing out here?" Her voice was softer than she'd expected. Hearing her voice, my body gave a sudden jolt. I slowly raised my head and caught sight of her. Instantly, my eyes filled with panic. I quickly scrambled to my feet, standing there helplessly, like a child who'd just been caught red-handed. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to." My voice was thick with nasal tones, hoarse and utterly pathetic. I don't dare go back. Sue Mama said she'd break my legs." As I spoke, tears began to fall again. Song Yalin's brow furrowed. "She's going to hit you?" I nodded, instinctively touching my swollen, reddened cheek. In the moonlight, the vivid imprint of the slap stood out strikingly. Song Yalin's gaze fell upon my face, her expression momentarily freezing. She reached out as if to touch me, but then her hand froze mid-air. It seemed she was repelled by how dirty I looked. I saw her hesitation clearly. A cold smirk crossed my lips, yet my face only grew more pained and forlorn. I lowered my head and whispered softly, "It's okay, madam. I'm not in pain. Mom Sue said it was because I was disobedient, because I made the young lady angry. That's why I deserved a beating. Just don't send me away. Any punishment is fine with me. I don't want to go to the orphanage. I heard from other servants that kids in orphanages don't have enough to eat, and they're even bullied." Every word I spoke felt like a needle piercing Song Yalin's heart. She came from a privileged background and had never seen a scene like this in her life, from childhood to adulthood. Here was a 3-year-old child, begging not to be kicked out, even willing to endure beatings. What kind of desperation was this? For the first time, a hint of resentment began to stir in her heart toward Su Fong. Even if she were just the child of a servant, surely she couldn't be treated this cruelly. "You, come in first," she said at last, after a long silence. I was stunned for a moment, almost unable to believe my ears. I looked up at her, my eyes filled with an overwhelmed, grateful astonishment. "Thank you, madam." I stepped into the room cautiously, standing awkwardly near the edge of the carpet, afraid to take another step forward. I kept my head lowered, not daring to meet her gaze or to look at any of the lavish furnishings in the room. I behaved as though I were a child who'd wandered by mistake from a slum straight into a royal palace. Self-conscious, yet tinged with a hint of curiosity. Song Yalin looked at me and, deep down, the slight annoyance she'd felt earlier gave way to pity. "Your name is Jiangyu, right?" she asked. I replied. "Who gave you that name?" "Mom Sue," I said. "She told me I was found under a pomelo tree." Song Yalin fell silent. She glanced at me, then turned her gaze to Su Enin, who was sleeping peacefully on the bed. One had been casually picked up under a pomelo tree. The other had been cherished and treasured amidst countless displays of love. How utterly unfair fate could be. Just then, I suddenly caught a sweet, fragrant aroma. It was from a plate of sliced mangoes placed on the bedside table, left there as a midnight snack for Su Enin. My eyes immediately fixed themselves intently on that plate of mangoes. Then, an expression of utter terror spread across my face. I started backing away uncontrollably, and my body began to tremble. "No, don't!" I cried out in terror. "Don't eat that. If you do, you'll die." My reaction was intense, almost as if I'd just seen some deadly poison. Song Yalin was taken aback by my sudden outburst. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, utterly puzzled. This thing, it's poisonous." I pointed at the mango, my voice shaking. "I've seen it before. There was a kid in our village who ate one of these, and his whole body broke out in red spots, and then he died." I spun a lie that matched my background and upbringing. A tale steeped in ignorance and fear. Song Yalin froze. A mango? Poisonous? Of course she knew mangoes weren't poisonous. But she also knew that everyone from the Song family had mango allergies. Mild cases result in a rash, severe cases, can actually be fatal. It's a family secret, passed down through generations. So secret that outsiders could never possibly know about it, except for those closest to the family. Yet here she is, right before me, the child. Why does she have such an intense reaction to mangoes? Could it be? A thought so absurd even Song Yalan herself finds it unbelievable has, just like Jiang Xinghua, begun to take root deep within her heart. She looks at me, her eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Then she glances again at the bed, at the daughter who absolutely loves mangoes. A single thought erupts wildly in her mind. Could this really be my daughter? And who exactly is the one lying on that bed? At this very moment, her world begins to turn upside down. Song Yalan's face turned deathly pale in an instant. She grabbed the dressing table for support, barely managing to stay on her feet. She looked at me, her lips moving as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I knew then that my goal had been achieved. The mango, that was the second fire I'd set. And this fire had burned straight into her heart, because that was her weak spot, the thing in her blood that could never be changed. Pretending to be startled by her reaction, I said timidly, "Madam, what's wrong with you? Did I say something wrong?" Song Yalan took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "And nothing, it's nothing." Her voice trembled slightly. You'd better not go back just yet. Just sleep here tonight," she said, pointing to a small sofa in the corner of the room. I froze, my eyes filled with incredulous delight. "Really, madam? May I sleep here?" Song Yalan nodded. She needed time to think things over carefully. And she also needed to observe me closely. "Thank you, madam. You're such a kind person." I was so excited that I almost jumped up, but I immediately restrained myself and just kept bowing repeatedly. Then, obediently, I walked over to the small sofa and curled up on it. The sofa was incredibly soft, 10,000 times more comfortable than my cold floor mat. But I didn't close my eyes. Instead, I kept them slightly open, peeking through a narrow slit as I watched Song Yalan. She no longer glanced at me. She walked over to the bed and bent down to look at Suinin. Her gaze became profoundly complex, filled with tenderness, tinged with habit, yet even more so with scrutiny and doubt. She reached out her hand and gently stroked Suinin's face. This face she'd been looking at for 3 years now suddenly felt strangely unfamiliar tonight. She stood there for a long time, so long that by the time dawn was breaking, she finally collapsed onto the bed, utterly exhausted. That night, I knew, she, like me, had been wide awake all through the night. Early the next morning, people sent by Jiang Zhanghua arrived quietly and unnoticed. They were a middle-aged man dressed in a white lab coat, looking just like a family doctor. He'd come so early that most of the servants hadn't even gotten up yet. Su Fang was called over. When she heard that they were going to conduct a paternity test, she was completely stunned. "Sir," she asked in a panic, Why are you suddenly asking for this?" Jiang Zhanghua sat calmly in the dining room, leisurely sipping his coffee. "Anen is about to start kindergarten, and the school needs a certificate of parent-child relationship on file," he said casually, offering a perfectly plausible excuse. Su Fang didn't dare ask any further. Then why do we also need to take blood samples from Jiangyu?" She asked the most crucial question, her voice trembling. Jiang Zhanghua lifted his eyelids and glanced at her faintly. "Since the doctor is already here, why don't we take the opportunity to give her a comprehensive physical exam as well? I think she's too thin. Please don't let her have any illness that could be passed on to Anen." This reasoning left her utterly speechless. Su Fang's heart sank to the bottom of her soul. She knew full well this wasn't just a routine physical exam. Her husband really did suspect something. Unable to resist, she could only accompany the doctor and first collect a sample from Su Anen. Su Anen cried hysterically after being pricked by the needle. Then they headed to Song Yalan's room. Song Yalan was already awake, but her complexion was terrible, with faint dark circles under her eyes. When she saw the doctor, she didn't show any surprise, almost as if she'd been expecting it all along. When the doctor prepared to draw my blood, I displayed extreme fear. Hold on tight to the sofa, sobbing and shouting, "No, don't give me the shot. Getting the shot will kill me." My reaction was exactly the same as that of an ordinary 3-year-old child. The more I acted this way, the less anyone seemed to suspect a thing. Finally, Song Yalan stepped forward. She crouched down and, for the first time, spoke to me in such a gentle voice. "Yoyu, don't be afraid. It's just a routine checkup. It won't hurt at all." She even reached out her hand, hesitated for a moment, then gently pulled me into her arms. Her embrace was warm, carrying a faint, delicate fragrance, completely different from the cheap soapberry scent that had always clung to Su Fong. This was the smell of Mom. In that instant, I almost couldn't hold back my tears and nearly burst into sobs. But I managed to restrain myself. Now wasn't the time yet. Under her soothing words, I obediently extended my arm. The doctor quickly finished drawing the blood sample. After the doctor and Su Fong left, only Song Yalan and I were left in the room, along with Su Anin, who was sulking on the bed, refusing to speak to anyone because of the injection she just received. The atmosphere felt strangely delicate. Song Yalan glanced at the needle mark on my arm, and a flicker of concern flashed in her eyes. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a candy. "Here, take this. It'll make the pain go away." I looked at the beautifully wrapped candy but didn't take it. I shook my head. "Madam, this must be quite expensive, isn't it?" "I can't accept it," I said. "Mom Su told me that servants' children aren't allowed to eat anything from the master's table." Song Yalan's hand, holding the candy, froze mid-air. Her heart felt another sharp pang. "Just take it," she insisted, shoving the candy forcefully into my hand with an unyielding tone. "From now on, in this house, you can eat whatever you want. No one dares to say a word against you," she said, her words carrying a hidden meaning. I lowered my head, peeled off the wrapper, and popped the candy into my mouth. It was incredibly sweet, by far the sweetest thing I'd tasted in 3 years. Just then, Su Anin became upset. She scrambled out of bed, pointed at me, and shouted, "Mom, that's my candy. You're not allowed to give it to her." She lunged toward me, trying to snatch the candy from my hand. Song Yalan instinctively stepped in front of me, shielding me with her body. "Anin, stop being so naughty." For the first time ever, she spoke to Su Anin in such a stern tone. Su Anin froze, utterly stunned. She couldn't believe that her mother, who had always been so gentle and compliant with her, would actually scold her harshly just because of some wild child. With a loud wail, she burst into tears again, crying more heartbreakingly than ever before. "Mom doesn't love me anymore. Mom's a bad person," she cried while punching Song Yalan gently with her little fists. On Song Yalan's face, exhaustion and irritation were evident. Instead of soothing her as she usually would, Song Yalan looked at me and said softly, "Yoyu, why don't you go out and play for a bit? Would that be okay?" I nodded obediently, grabbed my candy, and quietly slipped out of the room. From that moment on, I knew the balance in this home had already begun to tilt toward me, even if only by the tiniest, most imperceptible degree.
Welcome to my channel. The story is about to begin.